Okay, this is a theology of time for busy leaders. If only I had more time. Do you ever say that to your coworkers or to your wife or to your husband? If I just had more time. What are all the things you could do if you had more time? So many things. You could attend more seminars at ELF. You could attend seminars and spend time in the sauna and do some other work and keep up on your emails, wouldn't it? And you wouldn't have to choose between those things, like time in the sauna or time at the seminar on time management. You could just do both. Wouldn't that be wonderful? You could do all of ELF and then next week have vacation, and you wouldn't have to choose between ELF and vacation. What could we do with more time? I've often thought of that. God, why is this in such a limited amount? And why is it so frustrating to me? So what we're going to talk about is maybe the answer to some of our struggles from time doesn't just lie in techniques or in tools or in strategies, but in an understanding of the nature of time and how time is supposed to work, a theology of time. How does God view time? Because actually that has a lot of very, very practical implications. So that's what we're going to dig in today, and I think you'll find it interesting and also very practical. Now, as we're talking about time is your most precious resource. It is your most precious resource. It's the only resource you have that's absolutely fixed. You can get more energy, you can get more money, you can get more possessions, you can get more help, you can get more people on your team, but you personally can't get more time. It's fixed. You can't get more time in your life. God's going to give you a certain span that's already fixed, but you also can't get more time in your day. Now, maybe you can use it in a different way. You've got that 24 hours, but maybe you're going to sleep less during that time and work more, but still the amount of time is fixed. You can't sleep more and work more because you're in that limitation of time. You can't speed it up or slow it down. What if I have extra time today and I want to put it in the bank so I can use it tomorrow? I can't do that. I can't save it up. It keeps coming at you if you use it or not. There's a film, there's lots of different movies about time, like you go back in time or go to the future or time travel. One of them was called In Time, and it was about some time in the future where time was the currency. Time was the most precious possession, and you could buy time and trade time, and there you have this counting down, and rich people had lots of time, and poor people had poor time. Fascinating picture of what it would be like if actually you could save up time, steal time, borrow it, all that if time was a currency. Well, it's not. I'm sorry to tell you, it's not. And because of that, it's just extremely precious. And your view of time develops as you grow. Now, I don't know if you remember what you were like when you were a child, but this was something I would say to my mom. I would say, "Mom, I'm bored. I don't know what to do." It's hard to imagine saying that today. I'm not bored. I know plenty of things to do. And she would say, "Well, how about this?" "Well, I don't." And then she'd say, "Well, and we're going to have dinner in 2 hours." 2 hours? 2 hours? And time was like something to fill before something good happened. Christmas is coming, and the presents are under the tree. And I want to open them now, but I have to wait. And so you sit there and you look at the presents, how many days? And you open those little things with chocolates and count down. So basically, I had to kill time because there's these sections of time that have to somehow die somehow so I can get to the things that are good or because time is something to be killed. Well, you get older and you have a different perspective on time. As a young person, it's how to use time. So I got older, I get into high school, and in fact, you can get grants for helping young people use time well, because now it's about filling time. And so there's various clubs, and I started learning a musical instrument, getting these skills, going skiing, and how do I use time well? And it was great to be able to use it well. But then you get a little bit older after that, and you find out that you're using it as well as you can, but there's still not enough of it. And so I remember getting to college and going, wow, I have too many ways to use time than I have time. And so now I need to learn to manage time. So I read books on time management and on making lists and organizing them and prioritizing and time-saving tools that sometimes don't save any time at all, right? Because they distract us into all these time-saving things that we've got that actually sometimes fill time. And that was college, but this is what happened when I became an adult. I began to fight with time. Because I would make my list, and then something would happen, and I wouldn't get all my list done. There was an interruption, unexpected things. Sometimes even my own energy level wasn't the same. And it was like time would just come along and just steal things from me. I had 10 things I wanted to do today, but time stole the opportunity to do 3 of them. I only was able to do 7. And I'm fighting against it. I'm wrestling with time. Can I cram more into that time? Can I sleep less and work a little bit more? Could I go to 3 seminars and the sauna and vacation? And so you start to just say that the guy who wins is the one who, it's like those games where you go to a store and you say however much you can get into your cart in 1 minute, it belongs to you. And I kind of felt like with time, I've got this limited box and I'm just trying to get as much in it as possible and stuff's falling out and the clock is ticking. Okay, do any of you feel that? Yeah. So time for me became a thief and an enemy. And I remember this actually came to head at New Year's Day one year, because usually New Year's Day after you wake up and you're all groggy and everything, I would sit down and say, let me think about the year ahead. And I just think about the year ahead and I go, I'm tired before the year begins. Like, I don't want to think about the year ahead, I just want to sleep or something like that. And then I wrote this in my journal. I said, the month of December was a real press for me, and I feel like time got out of control. I was a responder rather than an actor, and too exhausted to find my way out. At the end, I was feeling that time is my enemy that is racing past me, stealing opportunities away, chances that won't be taken because there's not enough time. I'm losing them. I feel like I need to increase my skills, but also need a solider theological foundation. What is a biblical theology of time? What are principles that can be gathered from the Word? And most importantly, what do I need to change? I wrote that. And then I spent the next month studying time in the Bible, which I'd never done before. I never heard a sermon on time in the Bible, but I got out the concordance and went through and listed all the places that said something about time. And I said, what does God understand about time that I don't understand? And if I understood what He understood, would that help me? And I need to tell you, the things I'm going to share today absolutely changed my life. Like it was one of those milestones for me, what I learned in the next month and a half, and then I've been trying to apply since then. So this will be a challenge to apply some of these things, were just fabulously amazing to me. And where I started was, I started in the beginning in Genesis. And this is interesting in Genesis because I shouldn't have put that up there. What's the phrase that's repeated most in Genesis 1? Most often in Genesis 1? Actually, that's not the phrase, but that's very important. That's my second question. The most repeated phrase is what? It was good. And the second most repeated phrase is evening and morning. So God says 7 times in Genesis 1, it was good. And 6 times He says it was evening and morning. That's interesting. The most repeated comment is it's good. The second most repeated comment has to do with the limitations of time that I don't see as good. Something stops and it starts. I put me in limitations, and yet somehow in the midst of all this, God is feeling that this is good. And it just was so interesting to me that the eternal, unchanging God, who actually is above time, when He began to do His creation work, put Himself into the limits of time voluntarily. So He had the ability to have as much time as He wanted in a day and to do whatever. This is time. Time for Him is 1,000 years is a day. But in this important work of creation, He actually says we're going to start morning and evening, which that's also evening and morning. Why evening before morning? That's also a really interesting theological question. But He has these limits. And He says, here's a limit. Here's a section of work that I do in that limit. I stop and I say, that was good. That was good. So I should somehow view time as good. So then my question was, well, what's good about time? What's good about time? And going a little bit further, do you know what the chapter is in the Bible that has the most references to time in all the Bible? Ecclesiastes, yes. Ecclesiastes, let's turn to that. Sounds probably Ecclesiastes. chapter 3, and here it is, 28 times in 8 verses. 28 times in 8 verses. For everything there's a season and a time, for every matter under heaven, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant, a time to pluck up what is planted, a time to kill, a time to heal, a time to break down, a time to build up. He's talking a lot about time here. A time to weep, a time to laugh, a time to mourn, a time to dance, a time to cast away stones, a time to gather stones together. This is really interesting. Like there's different times that are appropriate for different activities. Time to embrace, a time to refrain from embracing, a time to keep silence and a time to speak, a time to love, a time to hate, a time to war, a time to peace. So what's the big theme of, he's saying like things are supposed to occupy a certain space in time. And then he hits verse 11. He says, he's made everything beautiful in its time. So if time is good, what's the good that time brings? Well, Ecclesiastes would say, time, actually the purpose of time is to bring beauty. That's interesting, right? That when things occupy their proper place in time, they become beautiful because of that place in time. That's really interesting. And I started thinking about, what are some metaphors for that? And one interesting metaphor is music. Because if you look at a score in music, there's 2 kinds of information there. One of them is the tone that's supposed to be sounded. And the second is time information. And there's 2 kinds of time information: when that tone is to be sounded and for how long. So when and for how long. When and for how long, what tone. Now imagine if you strip out the when and for how long information from the tones, and you take Beethoven's symphony and you just tell all the tones that are supposed to be played. Well, you might choose your own times for those different notes and your own lengths, and even though Beethoven was brilliant, it will be a really chaotic, ugly symphony. So that time information about when and for how long is as important as the tone that's supposed to be sounded. Now, you could also say, let's just make this much more efficient. Beethoven, it takes an hour and a half to play your symphony. We could just get so much more done. I could take that nap and go to that elf seminar if we would just shorten this down to 5 minutes or maybe even 1. What would a Beethoven symphony sound like if it was an hour and a half symphony played in one minute? It would lose all of its beauty. It would just be mud. There'd be nothing there. So actually the purpose of time is to create beauty. Now this is really interesting. For me, it's a thief, or it's something to be crammed in and filled as much as possible. It's something to be managed and controlled. Do I manage time? Or does time actually help manage me? Does that make sense? That there are notes that are written on this score that it's not just about how to get as many in, but about the location of those. And when the location is correct, then it's beautiful. Have you ever heard a piece of music that's rushed? It's done too fast? Or a piece of music that's done too slow? One of the things about great musicians is they have incredible sense of timing. There's something called the groove. And there's this spot that it sits in where it's just the timing is perfect. And it's not perfect in a mechanistic kind of way. You can sequence it to where it's actually perfect, and you lose the beauty. But it's perfect in that all of those notes are sounding in the kind of relation to each other that's perfect, that it pulls your emotion. It's perfect that it's beautiful. It's not perfect that it's absolutely precise. It's perfect in that it's perfect at creating beauty. And our actions should be the same. It's not about a precision that's mechanistic, but it's about a proper placement of activities in the symphony of time that brings beauty. So when I'm looking at my symphony, is saying the most important thing is to get as many notes out as possible, cram as many in, because I get rewarded for the number of notes I sound. That's the guy who wins is the one who gets the most done. Or I like this particular note, so I want it to sound all the time. I really like those bass notes, so I'm not going to do any others. Well, Ecclesiastes would say there's times for lots of different things. It's actually not just about the same thing you do over and over again, but it's about the contrasting notes that are sounded when they're supposed to sound, and the result is everything is beautiful. Isn't that something? That's just a really different picture of time. And so picture this in another way. It's not just your score, but it's like a symphony score and you have one instrument. And so let's say that you are the trumpeter. Well, you've got some notes, but those notes are in coordination with a lot of other notes being directed by the director. Well, let's say that you're the cymbal person. And you're sitting there going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3. I'm not doing nothing. I'm doing nothing. I'm not doing nothing. This is just empty. Well, no, it's not empty. There's a lot of other things going around you, and you're all ready for your crash. And what if I just get bored and go, I don't want to count the rests. I'm not doing anything. I'm not making music when I'm counting rests. I am. I'm creating silence, because actually silence is part of the score, which is interesting, even in our lives. Inactivity and rest is part of the score, because it creates space for the notes to sound. Okay, this is a different way of thinking about it. And that's part of the beauty, and that's part of the skill of a musician, is to know, and he goes on like this, and then what happens is that when you hear that, it sits right in the whole symphony. It's beautiful. It's incredible. You need that spot. But if he just goes, I want to play more, or I want to play here. Let me get all my notes done and go for coffee. Then the beauty's gone, and the coordination of that piece with the rest of God's symphony is not there. So this time information that God has out there, and the purpose of time, I shouldn't be fighting with time. I should be paying very close attention to time, not to fill it, not to manage it, but to discern what time is this? What's my note? What's the place I'm supposed to be playing? And have you ever heard a drummer practice, like someone on a set, alone? It sounds terrible. But then you put them in with the rest of the band, and it's perfect. And so that's part of it, is even my part in the score. It actually doesn't just become beautiful with my notes, it becomes beautiful as I'm carefully watching the score. It creates this symphony, and I hit the note at the right time, right after a note that you played, and right before a note that someone else played. Wow, who wrote this score? Because I'm just reading mine, and I don't know where it's all going or how everything else fits in. Isn't that cool? Isn't that an amazing picture? So what if we viewed it that way? Like that time information is really important. And you'll find actually that Jesus had this. So here's the section. Time makes things beautiful. But Jesus had this view of time. One of the things that was fascinating for me was to look at Christ, and he had 3.5 years. Oh, that is not much time. And he spent 30 years getting ready for his 3.5 years. That doesn't seem like a proper balance of time to me. In fact, for thousands of years, God had been preparing for this 3-year stretch. Now, if you gave me a 3-year stretch to culminate something that had been prepared for 2,000 years, I'd be like trying to cram that thing absolutely full, because I don't have enough time. But you never hear Jesus saying, I wish I could have done that, but I ran out of time. So frustrated we don't have it. Hey, disciples, I'm sorry. We could cover more of this, but we're out of time. Sorry. Father didn't give me enough time. I know. I'm kind of frustrated with it too. He never does that. He's never frustrated with time. Never. He's frustrated with other things like his disciples' lack of faith, but he's never frustrated with time. And there's some really interesting verses. So what we know is God has right times for you. He had right times for his son. Look at John 7. And this is such a fascinating passage when we look at Jesus in action. So John 7. And his brothers say to him, 7 verse 2, now the Jews' feast of booths was at hand. So his brothers said to him, leave here and go to Judea, that your disciples may see the works you're doing. For no one works in secret if he seeks to be known openly. If you do these things, show yourself to the world. For not even his brothers have believed him. So come on, get going. Get going. Time's wasting. And he says, my time has not yet come. See that? He's counting the rest. My time hasn't come yet. But your time is always here. In other words, you're willing to sound notes anytime you want. I'm reading the score. So there's a time that's his time. When he says things make beautiful in his time, he knows that there's his time for this particular activity. And then he goes on and look at verse 8. You go up to the feast. I'm not going up to the feast for my time. So he has a time that's his time, has not yet come. He's reading the score. It's not yet come. But after his brothers had gone up to the feast, then he went up also. The rest actually wasn't very long. That's really interesting. The activity was fine, but the timing was very important. And he had a sense of when was the time the Father had. And the same activity moved just a little bit later had a different impact. So it's not just what you do, it's actually when you do it that's also important. And there may be people around you who have a lot of other ideas about when something should be done, and you've got to play your score. When is your time? When's the time for doing that? And then look a little bit later on, he says in verse 30, he says, so they were seeking to arrest him, but no one laid a hand on him because his hour had not yet come. Do you see that? That's so interesting. Now, does that mean he's never going to get arrested? No, that's down here on the score. But the hour hadn't come yet. And so you have this sense through the Gospels of Jesus has he's very time-oriented, but it's time-oriented like a musician who's playing off the score and carefully watching times and durations so that they are according to what his Father is doing in him, through him, and around him. So that's just amazing. Another one you could look at, if you look to Mark 1, he says, the time has come. The kingdom of God is at hand. It's time. This is the spot. Time has come. The kingdom of heaven is at hand. Or another one is John 13. This is an interesting one where Jesus is at the last Passover. It's 13:1. He says, now before the feast of the Passover, when Jesus knew that his hour had come to depart from the world. You see these time indicators? His hour. This is the hour. That wasn't the hour here. It was the hour here, and he knew it. And now he knew what to do, which is just so crazy. Another one is John 11. And this is the story. This is such an interesting one, too, because one of his best friends is sick. And in verse 11 verse 5, now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So when he heard that Lazarus was ill, now what do you expect to happen here? He loved the sisters and he loved Lazarus. So when he heard he was ill, he dropped everything and went there as quickly as possible. Isn't that what you expect? He's lining things up. So when he heard that Lazarus was ill, he stayed 2 days longer in the place where he was. He's like, let's slow this down. What? And then when he decides to go, his disciples say, don't go up there, you're going to get killed. So he slows things down, and then when he goes into gear, his disciples say, you shouldn't be doing anything. You know, people around us will have so many ideas about how we should be playing our notes. And this is why it's really important that we're following the score. And then he gets there, and he gets a guilt trip put on him. John 11:6. No, we already did 11:6. So 11:21, and you'll see that Martha says to him, Jesus, if you'd been here, my brother would not have died. What a guilt trip. This is what I would have done. I know, but you know, us Messiahs, we're busy and we can't do everything. So you just need to understand, that I got a lot to do. I tried, but those disciples, they're not, I walk pretty fast, but they walk slow. I tried. I know, I'm sorry. I really should have. I heard that you were ill and then I forgot because there were a lot of things. I didn't look at my calendar and I missed it. Would you forgive me? Is there so many other things that he could have said? And he says, hey, if you believe, your brother will rise again. If you believe, you'll see the glory of God. So Jesus had this amazing centeredness in the midst of time. That's just fascinating. Wouldn't it be amazing to have that same centeredness? Because people are going to have all kinds of expectations. They're going to knock you around. They're going to think you're late. They're going to think you're early. They're going to think you need to do this and that. And you just see Jesus going, not my time, now it's my time. Not my hour, now my hour. And he had these right times for him. And I believe that God has right times for you and me too. I don't think this is just Jesus. Look at Psalm 31, verse 15 and 16. Psalm 31, verse 15 and 16. We'll start in verse 14. But I trust in you, O Lord. I say, you are my God. My times are in your hand. Isn't that great? My times are in your hand. Rescue me from the hand of my enemies and from my persecutors. So God has right times for you. Now, if you move forward, we'll run into another text that's very important. You notice we're just kind of working through the whole Bible here, speed reading the Word of God on this topic of time. Look in Ephesians. So you know Ephesians 2, 8, and 9, it's all about grace. You've been saved. But then we need to go on further in verse 10. For we are his workmanship, created in Christ Jesus for good works, which God prepared beforehand that we should walk with him in them. So I'm his workmanship, and he says he has pre-prepared good works. So this kind of addresses the issue of, do I have a score? Jesus had a score, of course. He was the Messiah. Do I have a score? Well, this passage says, he made me, and then he prepared good works in advance so that I would walk in them. Well, that's pretty amazing, isn't it? So could I really believe that that's true? Psalm 139, verse 16 says, I want to get this one exactly because this is another just amazing one. 139, verse 16, he says, your eyes saw my unformed substance. In your book were written, every one of them, the days that were formed for me, when as there was none of them. So God has this book, and he's got pages in it that are yours, and all the days of your life are written in the pages before you were born. That's what Psalm 139 says. So you could say, I don't have a score. Yes, you do. Yes, you do. In God's big symphony, there's a line right across there directly for you. Now, this can actually help us when we're playing a certain way and we turn the page and we're surprised about notes that come up there and we think someone made a mistake. So I got here on Sunday and I actually began preparing this PowerPoint, and my computer froze, which it's done again today. I'm having problems with my computer. It froze and I totally couldn't get it unlocked. And so I spent probably 2 or 3 hours trying to get and then I had to do something to purposely run down the battery to try to get it out of this frozen state. And then I went to my iPad and started preparing this PowerPoint on my iPad. And then I got my computer going again, and then I had to figure out how to get it from my iPad to my computer. There's a whole bunch of notes in here that I don't want to play. Like, this is such an interruption. God, I'm doing this thing on time, and you're stealing all my time. Right? I'm trying to get prepared. But here's one of the things is, if there are things that are outside your control and are coming your way, you have to know that the sovereign God saw that coming, and the notes he wants you to play include, because actually those notes were in scores around me that were out of my control. Like, how come the bass drums are playing really loud right now? How come there's some screeching noise in my symphonies? I have to go, well, God is sovereign. He knows what's going on, so I have to concentrate on it. So what now? I didn't expect this. What are the notes you want me to play right now in this part? Because you've got some, and they're different than what I expected, and hopefully my PowerPoint will go till the end. But this is great that He has these other things under control, and we know that even if you needed more time, God could actually give it to you. He could. Did it ever happen in Scripture where someone needed more time and God gave it to them? What was it? Joshua, right? They got this battle. They need a little bit more sunlight to finish it. He says, God, could you give us a couple more hours? God says, yeah. He just pulls the sun back and gives them a couple more hours. So here's the thing is, if I really needed more hours in my day, the sovereign God could actually give them to me. So if he doesn't, then this limitation that he's given me is actually part of his good plan for me, and it's incorporated in the notes that he wants me to play. Even though I'm playing my notes, and I'm kind of concerned about all the notes that are going around me, like my computer dying, and what do I do about that? I don't know. Is this, you want me to play some dependency notes right now? Do you want me to play some trust notes right now? I really want to play a get my PowerPoint note done. That's the one I want to play. He says, we're going to play that a little bit later. Let's play a trust note right now. Let's play a rest in me peace note. Right? You see, that's the note I want you to play right now in this moment, and then we'll play the get your PowerPoint done. Maybe we'll play it. Maybe we'll just have a session in your PowerPoint where work, and I'll get my work done without that note. Like there's a different note I want you to play. Now, wouldn't that be interesting if we moved through life with that kind of confidence in our sovereign God and a dependence on him for the things that he's doing? So there's these good works prepared in advance, but this is, God has right times for you. He has, here we go. Got to play a note of direct intervention with the computer. Time brings you good works that God has prepared for you. You need to be, now this is really something in Ephesians 5, 15 through 17. He says, look carefully about how you walk. And walk is a metaphor for living. Not as the unwise, and the Greek words there is unthinking people who aren't using their minds, but as the wise, making the best use of your time because the days are evil. Okay, this is an interesting one. What it means is it's going to be easy to miss your score. You're going to have good works that are prepared in advance, but we're in evil times, and you're going to have to be wise. You're going to have to keep thinking about this. And making the best use of your time actually is literally buying back, redeeming the kairos. Not the chronos, which is interesting. The chronos is the ticks that go like this. The kairos is the note that I'm supposed to play. The opportunity that sits, the kairos sits on top of the chronos, and it's an opportunity. He says, redeeming the opportunities because the days are evil. And so what I have to understand is I'm playing this score and people are, throwing tomatoes at me and they're trying to pull me off. Of course, this is not I had a friend who was a very good pianist and he was going to a competition. And one of the ways that his teacher would prepare him for the competition, she'd say, start playing your song. And then she'd turn on the radio, she'd throw plastic grapes at him, all kinds of things like that because she was trying to train him to keep playing the score no matter what was happening around him. And we've got a lot of chaos happening around us. The days are evil. And we're going to have to realize that we'll have to really work at being wise so that we redeem those opportunities. We capture the kairos that has been written for us. And then he goes on, therefore do not be foolish, but understand what the will of God is. Really a fascinating passage, isn't it? Wise and redeem the opportunities. So, and this is amazing when you redeem one of those opportunities. I was riding on a train back from Prague once, and I was preparing Sunday sermon. It was Saturday, so I had a very limited section of time. I got to prepare my sermon, then get home, spend a little bit of time with my wife, then get a night's sleep, and I had this all blocked out. It's managed very well. I'm sitting on the train, working on it, and if you travel a lot, you have the ability to just ignore everyone around you. Like you're in this cocoon, the train's full, so I'm sitting here, and I order some peanuts, and I start eating them, and I get one caught in my throat. You know how sometimes you get peanuts, and I just start coughing, and my eyes are watering. And the lady next to me reaches out, and she said, here, do you need a Kleenex? Do you need anything else? Could I get you a cup of water? She's just like really kind to me. As I'm like, no, I think I will. Well, thank you. And then I get back, and I start working on my message. And I just hear the Spirit say, talk to that lady. I don't want to talk to that lady. I want to get my sermon done. I don't have time to talk to that lady. Right? So wait, you put that note in the score at the wrong place. And so I was going like, and then he brought to, the Spirit's so good about this when he just brought to mind this Samaritan woman at the well and just said, you're at the well. There's someone sitting beside you. You need to talk to her. So I said, where are you headed? She said, Olmos. I said, what do you do? And she said, I work helping people eat healthily, like healthy bodies. It's so important for me that people be healthy. I said, you know what? We're in really similar work. She said, really? I said, yeah, you work on healthy bodies. I work on healthy souls. And people can be healthy in their body, but if they're not healthy in their soul, they're just as sick as if they were healthy in their body. Now, this literally is like 2 minutes into our conversation. And she said, that sounds so interesting. How do you do that? And we start getting into this conversation about Jesus and about the Bible. I've got the Bible over her. I go through the whole plan of salvation. She's just, oh, wow, I've never heard anything like this before. This is just boom, right into it. And you don't talk to people on trains that you don't know, especially in the Czech Republic. And we're in this deep conversation. So we get to the end, and I say, well, would you like to put your trust in Christ? And she says, well, this is all so new to me. I've got to think about it. I said, if I send you a Bible, would you read it? She said, oh, sure I would. Sure I would. Oh, just a second. And she starts rummaging in her purse. And she pulls out this little beaded angel and says, I want to give this to you. And I said, why? She said, because you've been an angel to me today. I was like, but angelos, a messenger, right? I was a messenger from God for her that day. And it was just so precious to, like I sounded a note and there's all this stuff going around me. I go, oh, wow. Oh, that little step of obedience that I did was like perfectly timed. Oh my God, that was amazing. And she got to Olomouc. I was going on to Ostrava, so I got up and I said, can I help you? I pulled down her suitcase and set it down. And we're standing in the aisle of a train, and she reaches over the suitcase and gives me his biggest hug. Thank you so much for that conversation. Well, Czechs, some of you got some Czechs in the room. Czechs are reserved. They don't hug people they don't know. It just does not happen. Is that correct? On the train, standing up in front of everyone in the aisle, that just doesn't happen, right? And we just had this amazing heart connection. And she went off and I went, I'm so glad I didn't prepare my sermon right now. And I got my sermon done. And I got to somehow it all fit in. But that was like this kairos, that this good work came along prepared in advance. So we have to stay alert. Don't be unwise, but be wise. Don't stop thinking. Don't be foolish. Because we're in an evil world that's constantly trying to distract us, and we need to really go, am I on my score? What's your next note? What do I do right now? Because it's beautiful when you play a note that God's prepared. It's so cool. It's so much fun. And sometimes you can get more done in like a few minutes when your hour has come or when your time has come. The same activity when your time has come can just be fabulously productive. And when you're just trying to cram it in anywhere or get as many notes as possible or whatever, it can be dissonant and difficult and hard. So what would it be like if we viewed time as this kind of a friend? Okay, let me ask a second big question. The first one is, what's God's view of time? But if you have that view, then how should I work in time? Like, what are some tips because we do need maybe some tips, some techniques, some things like that. And again, my question is, how does God work in time? When God put himself into time and began to work, or when he works in general, and he accepts the limitations of time even though he doesn't have to, how exactly does he work? And there's also 5 principles of how God works within time that can be extremely instructive to us. So if we go back to Genesis 1, and we see in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was without form and void, and darkness was over the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. And God said, let there be light, and there was light. And he saw the light, and it was good. What is he doing here? He's actually, and we could see this the whole way through, he works from the big to the small. He's got this big, chaotic thing, and the first thing he does, light and darkness. And then he goes, land and sea. And then he goes, but he works from the big to the small. What would it be like if he says, I've got this great idea for this really cool kind of bird. You're going to love it. I mean, he's got these feathers and beaks, and let's get working on that right away. But he doesn't have the big issues taken care of. Then now he got to that beautiful bird, but he started from the big things. So whenever you work, you just want to think God always works from big to small. How can I work from big to small? Just in general, how can I work from big to small? You're planning your vacation. So where are we going to go? Well, that's a small question. What's the big question? What do we need out of our vacation? What's the purpose of this vacation? Well, it's to vacate. Well, now it's just kind of, that's kind of chaotic. So you've got to separate some light from darkness. Like, what would make a good vacation? What would make a bad vacation? What's the purpose of this vacation for you, and how will you know if it's been a good one? Okay, then when you got that big question answered, then you can start saying, okay, let's start separating out some other things and working from the big to the small. So just in general, it's fun to work right away on something small because you can see that there's impact there. But whenever you work, God always works from the big to the small. So I led a board meeting this Friday right before I came to ELF, and I had a limitation of time because I had to leave and get here, and we had a lot to cover. But before the meeting, I met with several other people, and I said, what's the biggest thing we need to get out of this meeting? What's the main purpose of this meeting? Well, to get to our agenda. I know about our agenda, but like if there were 2 or 3 top, what's going to make this? How do we get the big outcomes in place first, and then we can work down from there. And at one point, there was an issue that was just a red herring. You know what red herrings issues are like? That they're like when dogs go like this, they would run a really smelly fish across their line. They would go, and this is what people do. They'll be having a discussion, and there'll be some really interesting question, and everybody will chase it. Well, I think this. Well, I think this. And so we got a red herring. We got an issue like that. Everybody in the room started to chase it, and we could have spent all of our time chasing that beautiful bird that really wasn't relevant to our big thing. So part of then my leadership was I had to say, guys, okay, that's an interesting question. What's the main thing we've got to get out of this meeting? Let's get back to it. So let's work from the big to the small. And then if we get those big things done, we can get onto the small. So work from the big to small. You know the illustration of maybe you've seen it like the glass jar, and you've got big rocks and small rocks. Have you seen that? And if you put the small rocks in first, the big rocks don't fit. You can't get them in. But if you put the big rocks in first, you get a lot of small rocks around them. And so just as you're thinking, even as you're thinking, this can be true as you're planning your whole week. You can say, what are the big rocks in this week? What are the things that are the most important? Let's work from the big to the small. I put my big rocks in, and then I work my small rocks around it. Now there's a counterintuitive things because there's less number on the big rocks and there's more number on the small rocks. So I can say, I won because I got more rocks in, but you might have just gotten a lot of little rocks. Sometimes we do this even when we're looking at our to-do list. I want to get as much done as possible, and so we do the easy stuff so we can check off the most, and left at the bottom is this big rock that actually was the most important. We didn't start with the most important thing. So a time management technique that would be like God works is take your to-do list, figure out the big rocks, put them at the top, and start with those. And then however far you get, at least you know you've been working on the most important things, and you probably can fit the other things around them. So work from the big rock to the small, the most important tasks to the least important. Figure out your priorities before you move your action. Work from the big to small. Okay, here's the second one. Create order by separation. What does he do? He has this formless mass, and he separates things. In fact, a bunch of his creative energy is actually designed to separate things, separate the light from the darkness, separate the land from the sea, separate the flying creatures from the creatures that don't fly, and that actually creates order. Often our worlds just look like, hey, let's just throw it all together and just do everything at once. It's just everything all at once. So I'm going to listen to a sermon while I'm making my to-do list, while I'm hugging my wife, and I think all those, the fact is that humans were not made to multitask. Multitasking is an illusion. We can't multitask. And sometimes our life is just chaos because we don't separate things. And you take the same things and you separate them, and they actually, oh, that's light, that's darkness, that's light, that's sea. It makes order. So think about getting things separated. One of the things that I remember when our family was younger, Connie would say, you're just not spending any time with me. And I would go back and figure out how much time I was physically in her presence, and it was a lot. What do you mean? I'm with you all day with this and this and this. It didn't feel like it because so many other things were with us while I was with her. And so I realized, I need to actually create separate space where me and her go, and I found out like even 45 minutes of separated space that was focused accomplished so much more than 6 hours of this mess. And then I found this was true even in my parenting, that we were together, the whole family, all the time, but there's no separation. Sometimes this, sometimes that. So I'd say to the kids, I'm going to go, Tyler, I want to spend half a day just with you. Well, that half a day just with Tyler was worth like 6 months of family time. It had so much value because it was separated. It was focused. It was unique. The same thing is true with your work. If you're working and listening and watching and all those different things, if you're working, focus. Like pull everything else out from your environment. Do only that. Separate yourself. If you're with your family, don't be doing work at the same time. If you're working on, so separate things out, and you'll find actually that you get much more beauty with the same amount of activity if things are separated into their separate spaces. Okay, we could talk more about that, but like I have a friend who Saturday for him and his family is a no electronics day, because they just always you're never separated from this. This is always everywhere. So just even creating some separated space, they could come back to it, and it was different. Like this is the space that's separated from electronics. This is the space that's with electronics. So at the beginning of the day, they put all of their phones in a box. The whole family does, and they have a electronic-less day, and then they pick it up at the end. Does that mean phones are bad? No, it's just. But when you have sea and land together, you have mud. When you have light and darkness together, you just have gray. You actually have to put things in their places, and then they become beautiful. Okay, follow that? We're moving fast, but that's a real key one. This next one is really great. Maximize your rhythms for rest and renewal. So look at how look at how God is working. He's not just working like this. Evening, morning, stop. That was good. Start again. Evening, morning, stop. That was good. Do you see there's a rhythm to what he's doing? It doesn't just go like this. And the rhythm actually is a repeating rhythm. It's not random. It's not, a 36-hour day and then a 6-hour day and just everything's random like that. He actually had a rhythm, because rhythms really help us. Rhythms save energy. Rhythms help keep us renewed. And so if you can build rhythms into your life that are life-giving and that are appropriate for you, you actually will enjoy all of life so much more. And everyone around you will also enjoy all of life so much more. So you have different kinds of rhythms. And the result is for rest and renewal, this rhythm. So a lot of people burn out, but it's because if you burn out and you take a break, make sure that in the break you're working on reestablishing your rhythms, because we actually were made to run and not be weary, right? And that doesn't mean you won't get weary somewhere along the way, but there should be an ongoing pattern of renewal in our lives so we don't just burn up. And what you see there are 4 kinds of rhythms that God put into the way he worked and the way he wanted his people to work. There's a daily rhythm. So if you can figure out your optimal daily rhythm, and also that daily rhythm doesn't mean 8 o'clock to 8:07. This is a rhythm like a musical rhythm. So just think about that. But what are the things that you just do every day? And you do kind of maybe in the same place, or if you don't do it in the same place, you do it every day. And what are the ones that are most important? So I'll tell you the ones that I work on every day. I sleep every day. Hey, isn't that great? Actually, sleep is really important. And if you don't get a good night's sleep, it's if you start cheating on that. So I sleep every day. I spend time in the Word and prayer every day. Got to do that every day. I try to eat well every day. I try to exercise every couple of days. And I talk to my wife every single day. Every single day I talk to my wife. Because that's my basic set of rhythms. And so you may think, oh, that's obvious. Well, it's not necessarily. Yesterday, the day before yesterday, I came from a pretty heavy round of teaching last week, and I was totally out of gas on Sunday. Like totally out of gas. And I was going, oh man, I need some more sleep. And then I went, I have not done anything but stand up or sit down for 6 days. So I got up yesterday morning and got up at 6 and ran for 2 miles, and I did not want to do that at all. That was the worst. I didn't want to. That was the last thing I wanted to do. I felt so much better afterwards. So my rhythms are really important. I called my wife. I called my wife this morning today. I called her in the afternoon. Whenever I'm on the road, whatever I'm doing, I talk to my wife every day. I just do that because my marriage is very important. Our relationship is very important. If I'll do that every day, I want to maintain my relationship with my wife, with my Lord. And so, but what I find is if I get that daily rhythm and I just know, hey, whatever else happens today, those are things I've got to do, it really helps me. So that's a daily rhythm. Then you have a weekly rhythm. And so you get Genesis 2, and you see that, and on the seventh day, God finished his work that he had done, and he rested on the seventh day from all the work that he'd done. So there's this weekly. You got to stop somewhere in the week to stop. You have to stop. Finish whatever you do. Stop. And rest. And that rest is not how many movies can I watch. It actually is a time set aside to be in the presence of God and to be renewed spiritually. And that's that rest, that rest in the music. So I have to put that rest in. And if you don't put that rest in, and that also is holy space set aside to God, then you can end up really in trouble. And we're going to talk in a minute about what happens if you're Christian workers. You work on Sunday, right? You have schedules that are all over the place. So do I. How in the world do you do this? Okay, this is a good question we're going to come back to. But then there were, oops, just a second. Go back. You can see what's happening to my computer. So here we go. Yeah, it was okay before I touched it. Maybe it's just going slow. Yearly. So in a year, the way God set up the whole nation of Israel is that there was a cycle of feasts in a year, 5 feasts or so. There were different times. They were often either before something important or after something important, designed to either get them ready for a section of their life or to renew them from a time of real output. And they had different purposes, and they were actually built into the whole nation. So one of my questions is, do you have a cycle of feasts in your year? Where you stop and you feast on something. One of the things I found is I didn't have this. I actually hit a stretch about 10 years ago where I really did burn out, and I took about a 6-month sabbatical, and I realized that one of the problems was I didn't have my feasts in. I was doing some of the other stuff, but I wasn't doing my feasts. So, and a feast is not just a vacation. A vacation can be a feast, but it might not be a feast because these feasts had particular purposes. So I put 2 in, and they really helped, and then I just got a 3rd one. And this 3 cycle of feasts for me really makes a difference. Let me tell you about my yearly feasts. So in August of every year, I have a bucket feast. And what that is I try to start September 1st with all my buckets full. So in July, I'll be saying what buckets are low and how do I make sure that they're filled. And the last 2 weeks of August and that is vacation, but I spend it sleeping, walking, I do lots of reading because I have to fill that bucket. Time with the Lord, time with my wife. I want to come into September my buckets can run down various places in the year, but I want to make sure at least once a year they all get full and I go into the fall with all my buckets full. So that's been really helpful for me. That's my first feast. Another thing is I've got all these study projects that I never get to, like long-term preparation, like I've got a series coming up and I got to really dig into the Word. There's some books I need to read. And I realized I was just kind of picking that away. But if I had a study feast, this sounds really fun to me, a study feast where it's the time to do all my long-term study and thinking and maybe writing and creating. And so in December, I actually have a 2 to 3 week study feast. I do it like before Christmas because everyone's so busy they don't even notice I'm not there. That's a great place to just disappear. And December is, and so I go someplace and I study, I write. A lot of actually the curriculum that we're using in Josiah Venture right now has come out of my years of study feasts. It's extremely productive. I'll think about my topics for the next 9 months and kind of get them outlined out, what books I need to read. Oh, and I love study. It's so much fun for me. It's a wonderful feast. And then I have grown kids, and I have grandkids. I have 3 kids and 6 grandkids, and I interact with them all in different places. But wow, family's really important. So this is the last one I just put in. Once a year, I have a family feast, and so we took 5 days and went down to Montenegro, and you can ski in Montenegro. I don't know if you knew that, but we did a ski time with the whole family, and for 4 or 5 days, it was just a family feast. A whole family were just spending this together. And we got more done in 4 or 5 days of that family feast than I would in a lot of other times. Now, it's not particularly refreshing. It's because I'm managing all these people and these kids in there, but that's not the purpose of it. I got my bucket feast to do that. And I didn't get much study or reading done, but that's not the purpose of it. I've got my study feast to do that. And then there's this family feast that's focused on that. Those are mine, but it would be interesting to think about what are things I need to make sure I eat a lot of. So I eat a lot of rest at a certain time. I eat a lot of God's Word at a certain time. Extra amount of family. And if you can get your cycles right in the year, it's tremendously renewing. And so I get a stack of, you need to read this book, you need to read it, and I just stack them all up, and in my bucket feast I often am reading a book a day. I love that. That's just, I'm filling up my mind bucket with all this great stuff. I'm not working on study for some project or something. I'm just filling myself, listening to podcasts. It's just wonderful. And then here's another thing that God did is He created all this stuff around it, and then in verse 11 He said, "Let the earth sprout vegetation, plants yielding seed and fruit trees bearing fruit, in which there's seed according to His kind on the earth." So He created fruit with seed. So it was actually living, but it was potential of reproducing. And then He goes on and does the animals, and He said to reproduce according to their kind, and He saw it was good. So here's one of the things: if you invest in living things that multiply, you actually will maximize the time that you invested, because stuff will go without you. It just has this energy. Now, if I build a house, it doesn't grow and multiply houses. It takes constant energy. But living things, my kids are going off, they're starting families, and they don't even tell me about what they're doing, and they do it. And it goes on and multiplies. We got another generation coming up. So here's an example. We had a big outreach thing that we're doing online, and needed teaching for it. In the first year I did the teaching, really enjoyed it, all the study. We came up to the second teaching, and my partner said, I got to get going studying on it. He said, "Dave, you can't do that." I said, "What do you mean?" He says, "You have to prepare the messengers and not the message." Like, if you're always the only one that teaches, then you're producing a talk, and you're not producing teachers. Which a talk is dead and teachers are alive. Do you see that? They're alive and they're reproducing. And also, if I teach them in a way that they could teach others, then I actually have a living thing that multiplies. And so, that's a really different kind of work. And it is a different kind of work. So we decided on 4 young teachers, and we met together, studied the passage together, and then they went off and did their notes, and I came back and I evaluated what they did, and then they practiced, and I watched them give feedback. And it's a totally different kind of work, but they did a fabulous job, and they keep doing that job. They don't need me around now, and they learned a lot. And if we did it again, all I'd have to do is I have to just call one of them and say, "Hey," because they know how to do it. And not only do they know how to do it, but they're passing it on. So how do we not just prepare a message, but prepare messengers? How do we not just make disciples, but make disciple makers? How do we not just raise funds, but raise fundraisers? Okay? How do you not just prepare teaching, but prepare teachers? How do you not just work, but prepare workers? And so you see that God is investing in living things that multiply, which extends the impact of His activity a long ways. And then this is the last one, and we're getting out of time. Isn't that something? Be flexible without losing form. Be ready to adapt without abandoning. Now, these 2 passages are really interesting, because Jesus is walking through the fields, and the disciples are picking grain, and the Pharisees say, "You're working on the Sabbath." And sometimes our rhythms are rigid like that, like they become legalistic. And so the purpose, and Jesus says, man is not for the Sabbath, but Sabbath for man. So your rhythms are actually supposed to serve you. It's not you serving your rhythms. And you have to have that certain flexibility in your rhythms. So whatever rhythm you have, it won't work all the time. And you have to modify it. And you won't get your Sabbath sometime. But actually, you're not serving your rhythm is serving you. And then a little bit later, in Mark 6:30, he says to his disciples, let's go away because you need rest. And then they go away, and all these people show up, and he teaches them. And then he tells the disciples to feed them. Wait, he told them they needed rest. He gets interrupted. And then what we find is then he sends the disciples off alone, and he climbs a mountain, and he spends it in prayer. And so what you find is he has this rhythm plan that gets interrupted, and he adjusts, but he doesn't abandon. He rests 2 days later. And so this is something that's really interesting about how do we make all these rhythms not legalistic, but make sure that they're serving us. We're not getting mad at the people who are interrupting our rhythms, being able to adjust, but when we adjust to not abandon the outcome that we're going for and we move it somewhere else, which I think is very important for a Christian worker who has a lot of interruptions. How do we stay flexible without abandoning our outcome?